This is the Rich Dad Radio Show. The good news and bad news about money. Here's Robert Kiyosaki.
Hello. My name is Robert Kiyosaki. This is the Rich Dad Radio Show where we talk about the good news and bad news about money. I'm here with my good friend, George Gammon.
Hi, this is George Gammon of the Rebel Capitalist Show, and it's going to be an interesting show because we're now screwed up. So there's a lot been happening, and I think also there has to be a God somewhere, because I've respected George for so many years, and now
Robert.
He lives next door. I mean, through that wall is George's office because we got rid of our CEO, which is a good thing. Replaced it with George. So I was saying the other day, I said, it's like having God upstairs. Because when I need a question, I just call George. I just come upstairs. So George is upstairs. He's the God of macro.
Yeah.
And now we're going to be broadcasting from our little Rich Dad office, like it's right next door. So
yeah, but you've gotten into macro with your most recent book. I mean, that's something I wanted to start with because we were at dinner the other night with our good friend Ken McElroy and Mike Dillard, and you brought us all a copy of this book that you've got with you right now. It's the Communist Manifesto. And we were talking the other day about how this has made a lot of predictions that we're seeing come to fruition now. I think Marx got the predictions right, but he got the solutions wrong. Way wrong.
It's unbelievable. This book came out, Communist Manifesto came out in 1848, so 160 years, whatever it is. I'm not good at math. But in 1965, I left Hawaii, and I went to school in New York, military school. And I didn't go to a snowflake university, I mean, the first thing they do is they start yelling at you, screaming at you. First word is mission. What is the mission? Everything is mission driven. And I went, holy mackerel. And then my instructor to study economics, he had us read the Communist Manifesto, Mein Kampf, Mao's little book, and other things. So we understood who the enemy was. Right. And so when I went to traditional business school for my MBA, which I never finished, they studied U.S. economics.
Right.
But we don't know what Marx economics is. Mm-hmm. And the thing that's frightening about this book, I mean, Sarah and I we just typed it out. Many of his predictions, he said, are coming true today.
Right.
Today. So that was in 1848. So this book was really, really prescient. And capitalism's in serious trouble.
Yeah, what are some of the predictions that you see coming true?
Well, a big one was this here. Who stole my pension?
Yeah, right.
Let me give you a little history. So in 65, I go to Kings Point for school. And in 66, they sent me to Vietnam because our school sent us out to sea. And I go to Vietnam for the first time, and I started to see this book coming true. It's one thing to read about something, but when you go to a war zone, which I did in 66, on board a bomb carrier, we were carrying 750, 500, 1,000-pound bombs to Cam Ranh Bay in Vietnam, I started to see this book coming true.
Yeah, right.
So I come back to school, and I talk to my English teacher, and there's teachers you love and teachers you hate. And my English teacher was a guy who went to West Point, flew the B-17 in World War II, got shot down twice, captured once. Then I went back to Harvard, got his PhD, became an English teacher, PhD. He was teaching at Texas Women's College, which is all-female school. And he comes to Kings Point, and we're all male, all young boys, 18 years old to 22. And so the guys asked him, I said, why did you leave Texas Women's College? He says, the young girls were screwing me too much. Here we are, 18-year-old guys going, our brains fried on the spot. You're getting late too much. He goes,
it reminds me of seeing a Beavis and Butthead, right?
So I'm going, holy mackerel. So anyway, that's how it started. I respected the guy, and he talked about what it was like to fly the B-17 and bomb, And this was before the P-51 fighter escort. So they were going naked into Germany. And that's why they got shot down so much. Kim's father was a B-17 pilot also.
Yeah.
It's interesting, that generation. So then the Israeli war broke out, 67, and Israelis toasted the Egyptians Air Force, just wiped them out, the 6-day war. I went, holy mackerel, they're having fun out there, So 67, I'm now 20 years old.
Yeah, right.
And then I go back to school. I got the high-paying job with Standard Oil, just like my father wanted. I was a third mate for Standard Oil. I'm sitting at sea, and I keep thinking about my English teacher. And so I go back to the academy, and I said, tell me more about what it was like to fly in combat. And he says, best decision he ever made in his whole life. He said, I would do it again. Even if I lost my life, I would do it again. And then the war, Vietnam, because I was draft exempt, because I was called non-defense vital industry, oil. As long as you drove oil tankers, they couldn't draft you. So I'm making all this money as a 24-year-old kid, and the English teacher got to me. The 67 war got to me. So not being the brightest guy in class, I joined the Marine Corps, and in 72, I'm in Vietnam, and I'm seeing the war again. And everything this guy was writing about was coming true, but it's coming true today.
Yeah, everything Marx was writing about was coming true back then.
1848.
Yeah, but you see it really coming true today, right?
And this is the big one, okay? Who's told my pension? What Marx says, the problem with capitalism, it leaves the bottom half poor. So you could be what he called middle class in capitalism in America, but capitalism will ultimately push you down into poverty.
Right.
And so in 74, I come back from Vietnam, ERISA comes out. ERISA is the 401k today. Now, you and I know what happens when that market crash was just coming.
Yeah, yeah.
The boomers, my generation, are toast.
Yeah, the middle class gets wiped out.
Yeah, because we're so dependent on this thing called a 401k, which is a defined contribution pension plan. In other words, the defined contribution means if you put in $1 million, hopefully get $1 million back. But the old pension plan was called a defined benefit. So if you worked for Ford Motor Company and they promised you $1,000 a month, Ford guaranteed the $1,000 a month.
Yeah.
But a defined contribution, Wall Street, as long as Wall Street stayed up, it was a good deal. So the reason we wrote this book here is my classmates who flew for United Airlines and all that, they lost their pensions. PBGC, Pension Benefit Guarantee Corporations, they took their pensions. So as you and the reason we always get together, and we're talking with Jeff Snyder and all this, you're talking about the euro dollar crisis and how they're pumping up the stock market right now. My prediction is my generation, who are affluent today, will be in poverty in 10 years.
Yeah, and I think I would take it a step further because I think it's not just your generation, but it's American society because now our economy is completely dependent upon the asset prices or the assets that are in the 401k.
Yes.
So if the 401k crashes as a result of assets, that means the entire economy crashes, and that goes back to what Marx is saying, and that's how those two books really dovetail on one another.
And there's one more thing that Marx was talking about. So his complaint, which is accurate, that capitalism will turn the bottom half into poverty. He writes about how capitalism screws employees. He talks about how doctors and lawyers will no longer be exalted. This is in 1848. So for those who read Rich Dad, Poor Dad or the Cash Flow Quadrant, E's or the employees, they're always afraid they're going to lose their job. So the smart guys were the S's, doctors, lawyers, accountants, and all this. And he says to this in 1848, the capitalism was going to screw the S's.
Right.
And we screwed them via taxes.
Yeah, but I would argue that it wasn't free market capitalism that did that. It was the Fed, it was the central planners, ironically, that brought his predictions to fruition. He thought it would be the capitalists, where it was actually the central planners, if you really get into the nitty-gritty, who are Marxists. There you go.
Yeah.
So it all comes full circle.
And that's why George goes around with this, and the Fed, and he and Robert Barnes are suing the Fed, and Ron Paul says, and the Fed, because if you read not this book, but some of Marx's later books, and it was actually Stalin and Lenin who said the Federal Reserve Bank is a Marxist organization.
Yeah.
Just like Black Lives Matter is Marxist. Now, I have no problem with that. Be upfront about it.
Yeah.
But everybody thinks the Fed is federal. It's not. It's a cartel.
Yeah. Yeah. And what it does is through quantitative easing, through artificially low interest rates, and through bailing out these huge corporations, it takes capitalism and it completely perverts it. It distorts it. And that's why I always use the term free market capitalism. not just capitalism.
Right.
Because people like to argue and say, well, look at what happened during the GFC. That was a result of the global financial crisis. Right. That was a result of capitalism gone amok. And look, the Fed came in and bailed out all these corporations. That's what capitalism does. I said, no. That has nothing to do with capitalism.
Amen.
And that has nothing to do with a free market. So if you look at things in terms of a free market, which is really what capitalism is, that does not involve bailouts.
Correct.
That involves actually letting businesses go bust. That's right.
Yeah.
So then those people who are prudent can come in, buy the assets, and that benefits society at large moving forward.
Correct. They were too big to fail, which is communism.
Yeah.
And so that's why the Fed is the third central bank, but it's not really a central bank. It's a Marxist organization.
Yeah. And I would say it's not just communism, but it's kind of this blend of corporatism. And so when I hear the word corporatism, the first thing that comes to my mind is what we saw in 2020, and especially with the lockdowns.
You got it.
Right? Because we basically told small and mid-sized businesses that you're no longer open for business.
Exactly.
You can't do, you're bust, basically.
That's exactly what he's saying in this book.
Yeah, so that consolidates all of the demand to these huge mega corporations.
Correct.
So then is it easier, if you're someone, let's just say that's a Marxist, that's trying to control the means of production, is it easier to control the means of production when all goods and services are produced by 100 mega corporations or millions and millions and millions of small businesses?
Correct.
Obviously, those 100 mega corporations. So that would lead one to ask the question, well, was what we saw in 2020
the start of communism?
That's right. That's right.
So that's why he writes them. And Sarah wrote up some of the excerpts we're going to study tomorrow, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's right.
So he says that there was, so my English teacher points out there was stage 1 and stage 2. So there was capitalism. Stage 1 was socialism.
Mm-hmm.
You see, they couldn't accept communism at first. So what Marx says, we have to put in socialism as stage 1. Stage 1. So that was Social Security. Everybody's now on Medicare, welfare, and all that. We're now a welfare nation.
Yeah.
So stage 1, which is socialism, completed. And my English instructor, this is in 1966, 65, he says sometime in the future, communism is going to step in. And communism is opposite of socialism. And so here I'm hanging in the sky in Vietnam going, holy mackerel, there it is. Because what happens is when communists take over from socialists, they murder the socialists. If you look at history, every time communists took over, the first people they kill are the intellectuals.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's about to start.
Yeah. And you started right there with socialism and then taking that to the next step based on the Marxist ideology.
That was
communism.
2020.
Right. But if we take it a step back, or if we go back even further in the timeline, what the Marxists talk about is late stage capitalism.
They do. I didn't see that.
Yeah, so this brings up our good friend Jeff Snyder in a different way.
Right.
I'm a huge fan of his content, and one time I was listening to Jeff, and I've actually had a conversation with him about what the Chinese did when the Berlin Wall came down.
Correct.
When communism came down, let's say in the early 90s, the Chinese actually sent in a group of economists to Russia
to study
it, to figure out what happened there, because their economies were very similar.
Right.
And so the economists came back to China, and their conclusion was not that communism failed. It's that they just didn't do it right. So how did they do it wrong? Well, they didn't allow capitalism to flourish before they came over and before they came in and tried to take over the means of production.
Right.
So most people don't realize, but you do because you've brought up this book, which I think everyone should read to know the enemy, is the fact that Marx really wasn't anti-capitalist to a certain extent. He saw the value in the industrialists and the capitalists of their time because he knew that they were very good at building stuff. He just thought that late stage capitalism was when they can't extract any more profits, then they'll start to feed on their workers by lowering their wages, and the workers are their customers.
Yeah.
Therefore, they're shooting themselves in the foot to where the whole society that the capitalists have built will crumble. So it's up to the communists or the socialists maybe to take over the means of production by any means necessary.
Correct.
Or else the capitalists will implode the whole system that they built.
Correct.
Right.
So what he recognized was the flaws, again, in 1848, the flaws in capitalism. So stage one would be socialism, which we had in 1933, FDR puts us on Social Security, we got welfare, Obamacare, and now we have so many Americans without that government stimmy check. We're finished.
Yeah.
Then he said stage two would kick in. So in 2020, I'm not a Republican or Democrat, I'm not endorsing Trump, who's a friend of mine, or Biden. I'm saying communists took over in 2020. And when we were on that call with you and Jeff, you were talking about the Eurodollar system and all this stuff, and the fractional reserve system and bank reserve currency, which is macro. That's where the heist took place. And so what's happening today, I just got it on this here, the European Union is starting to collapse because, as you said, it's not the depression, it's the stop of economic activity. How do you say that? What's happening there?
Yeah, so when some of us macro geeks get together...
nobody else can understand, which is the problem.
We use the term deflation and inflation very loosely.
Correct, interchangeably and stuff like that.
Yeah, based on the context. Right. And when I talked to Snyder, and we just talked about this recent phenomenon with the Eurodollar future curve inverting, and he talked about that creating an environment that's deflationary. Well, most people see that as prices going down. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But what that really means is we have a reduction in global economic activity. So, and this makes sense because you see what's happening in Austria, where they're going into lockdown again. You see what's happening in Germany with these mandates. You see what's happening in Australia, where they're literally putting people in quarantine camps. And you say, okay, well, is that going to produce less stuff in the future or more stuff? Obviously less stuff. So this Euro-dollar market is saying, hey guys, wake up.
Yeah.
These draconian measures
are
working. Not only are they not well, they're working if you want to reduce economic activity, but they will most likely see them into the future, and this is going to crush the global economy, and it's going to make the global economy go into a recession, which makes everyone go into the arms of that person, that dictator that's riding in on the white horse, who is a central planner, who is a Marxist that says, I can solve all of your problems.
And interesting, okay, so this here, I just got, the Wall Street Journal just said that this morning. Mm-hmm. They said that Europe is shutting down because the vaccine's not working.
Right.
They vaccinate, but it doesn't work. People still get sick.
Yeah, especially with this new variant, right? Right.
So they're losing control. So rioting's blowing up in Europe, like Austria, it's a big place. Turkey's in serious trouble. And so the world economy is coming apart. And if that crashes the stock market, that's the pensions.
Yeah, right.
My generation of boomers was 1974 when I came back from Vietnam. I find my poor dad broke, even with a PhD. Exactly as Marx predicted, the intellectuals would go.
Yeah.
So then in 74, ERISA comes out, which is the 401k. And today, as we speak in 2021, December, 10,000 boomers are retiring every day. And they're dependent upon the stock market. And if the Euro-dollar system comes down, what do you think is going to happen to the U.S. stock market?
Yeah, and let's also think this through, because the Fed just came out with an announcement where they're taking the taper or their quantitative easing from 105 billion down to 75, and this is kind of on the path to raising interest rates, but it puts the central planners in a very precarious position. Because right now, as most of your viewers know, we've got prices going up significantly in the United States. The CPI says it's 6.8%, but we know it's a lot higher than that. So we've got all this consumer price inflation. Okay, well, if the Fed comes out and increases interest rates, and if that does crash the stock market, that crashes people's 401k, then everyone's going to say, well, Fed save us. Fed save us. Where's the Fed put? Well, then if they come back and say, okay, well, we'll reduce interest rates back down to zero, we'll do quantitative easing again. But well, wait a minute, time out. Because remember, we've got inflation at 6.8%. So if they do that, then inflation most likely goes to 7 to 8 to 9, and that's as measured by the government. So they're in this we all are in this crazy position where either you lose a tremendous amount of purchasing power by the 401ks crashing, or you lose a tremendous amount of purchasing power by the prices of the stuff that the average American buys daily going up by 10, 15, maybe even 20% per year.
Correct. And that happened in 72 also when Nixon moved jobs into China. Do you know what I mean? I was of that generation watching all this stuff happening.
Yeah, yeah.
And the other thing that this book says here is, as you know, inflation makes the poor poor. It doesn't hurt us.
No. It's
if inflation is in asset prices, like the stock market, real estate, we make fortunes. But the working guy out there working for $50 an hour or whatever they work for today, he just took a haircut. Then he can't afford to live.
That's right.
And then you have the southern border right on our border right here, wide open. People are coming in droves. They have smash and grabs. This is all stage 2 communism. And they defund the police. They're going to try and take our weapons away. This guy Kyle Rittenhouse, was an issue of gun control. Supposedly, the press reports that he shoots black people. He shot white people.
Yeah, right.
It is so screwed up, I can't believe it.
And what was one of Stalin's main tactics? It was to create divisiveness.
Yes.
You pin people up against each other, and then they ignore who's really pulling the strings.
Correct.
And then you can basically do whatever you want. Remember our good friend Chris Martinson?
Yes.
When he did that presentation
at your event,
at our event here a couple weeks ago. Yeah, but remember he talked about that experiment with the rats in the cage.
Yeah.
So basically, if you've got one rat in a cage and you've got the scientist out there that's shocking the rat, if it's in a cage by itself, it'll just kind of, huddle up into a ball and it won't really do anything. But if you put 2 rats in the same cage, and if you shock them, then they'll think it's one another. And they will start to fight, and they'll actually fight to the death. Because they don't know that it's that guy out there in the white lab coat. And so it's kind of this I forgot what the exact experiment was called, but we can see that playing out right now in the United States, where the media and the central planners and the social media especially is trying to make us even more and more divisive. And then we, the average Joe, look around and we aren't sophisticated enough or have the education to understand all of these things at play, like that's going to be in your book here. And so we look at everyone else out there and we say, oh, it must be that person that's wearing a mask, or, oh, it must be that person that's not wearing a mask. And then we start to really fight, or it must be this Rittenhouse character, or it must be the people
Black Lives Matter.
Yeah, or whomever you don't like, right? Whatever side of the aisle you're on. Right. And then it just leads to more and more and more fighting. And then when you combine that with the 3 things that have historically made people go get the pitchforks and the torches, and I'm talking about food prices going up, energy prices going up, and shelter going up. Right. That creates this powder keg that can only lead to more and more social unrest.
Amen.
Yeah.
And he wrote this in 1848, and it's written in here.
Yeah.
And he talks about so many things like technology, like Jeff Booth talks about the price of tomorrow. Yeah. There's going to be fewer jobs.
Yeah. It's just what's bizarre about his conclusions is that he blames all of this on capitalism. Yes. When really, if you study it, it's the result of more and more central planning.
Correct.
Yeah.
And the Fed is central planning.
Oh, it's
the third Federal Reserve Bank.
That's the quintessential. It's the definition because they're central planning money.
And the other thing that Lenin says, why you crush the proletariat, the bourgeoisie and all this is taxes. So America was really formed in 1773. It was called the Boston Tea Party. Yeah. And now all they want to do is, I couldn't believe Biden saying, we're going to raise another $10 trillion, but it won't cost us anything. Yeah. How stupid do you have to be? Yeah. How stupid do you have to be where you get this guy Biden stands up there and he says, we're going to spend another $10 trillion. I'll tell you how much a trillion is. If you spent $1 a minute, it would take you 32,000 years to spend $1 trillion. Yeah. Yeah. It takes them a minute to print $1 trillion.
Yeah, it's just.
But we're not going to raise any taxes.
Yeah, of course not. But what I want to do is
let's take a break and then we'll go to it.
Oh, see, I was going to. That's my job.
Okay, your job. You're Robert Kiyosaki.
That's right.
I'm George Gammon, the rebel.
So I'm Robert Kiyosaki. This is the Rich Dad Radio Show, where you talk about the good news and bad news about money. We're going to go to a break and be right back with my good buddy George Gammon, the original rebel capitalist. Hello. This is the Rich Dad Radio Show. I am your host for the day, Robert Kiyosaki. This is the show where we talk about the good news and bad news of money. I've got my good friend here, the rebel capitalist, Mr. George Gammon, at least for the day. And we're talking about a new book, or we're going to talk about a new book, The Capitalist Manifesto. But to understand the Capitalist Manifesto, we have to understand history by reading the Communist Manifesto. And that's what we were talking about earlier. So we discussed how these dynamics are at play with central planning, the Fed, with them potentially raising interest rates, with the stock market coming down, that affecting people's 401k. I think the next question is, why did you write Capitalist Manifesto? Is that an antidote or maybe a solution to the problems that we're seeing today that Marx outlined but gave us just dangerous prescriptions for?
Right. Thank you. That's, like I said, I went to military school. I didn't go to snowflake school.
Yeah.
And we were raised to be strong men. And so this book here is a tiny book. My book, Capitalist Manifesto, is a thick book because this is one of the most influential books in world history, the Communist Manifesto. And what I do in Capitalist Manifesto is track the progress through all these years. Mm-hmm. Because what happened when I came back from Vietnam in 1973, I flew into Norton Air Force Base, and we're taxiing up. There was no flags, no waving, no Johnny Welcome Home and all this stuff. The pilot of the Air Force plane says, "Ladies and gentlemen, as soon as you get in the terminal, get out of your uniforms. America has changed." Mm. So this is 1973. I get off. I get hit by eggs. I get spit on. All these hippies, the Woodstock generation. My own classmates. Not my classmates, but the same generation are spitting on us.
Right. And
I'm going, holy mackerel. And so that was the change. And then in my book, Capitalist Manifesto, I write all the quotes throughout history that was warning us. And this guy was warning us back in 1848. One thing he warned us about in this book was that women are going to take over. He says, what's going to happen is, and that was, our friend Rollo Tomasi and all this, they always talk about how men's testosterone is coming down.
Yeah.
And men's wages are coming down. But women are coming up.
Yeah.
And he talks about Rollo talks about hypergamy, and the epiphany effect is that women are waking up that men aren't capable of taking care of them anymore.
Yeah, right.
Men are hopeless. So that's why we do very well at Rich Dad with a lot of young men coming up and all this stuff. They're seeking new answers.
Yeah.
And that's what else he predicted here. There was one more thing. He says, capitalism is power. It's a social power. He hated that.
It's a power struggle.
He hated it because if you're a capitalist, you had too much power.
Yeah, right.
So he went to take you down. He took you down by taking away your property. It's not abolition of all property. It's abolition of rich guys' property. And that's what these guys are doing. One more thing here. He defines what a communist is. A communist is not a socialist. A communist is a highly educated person like my poor dad. He says they're they're the best people on planet Earth, and today we call them the liberal elite. He calls it in this book. So in my new book, Capitalist Manifesto, people hated me before because in Rich Dad, Poor Dad, I called my poor dad a poor dad, PhD with a poor dad. But in my new book, Capitalist Manifesto, I call him a Marxist. And the reason that is because most teachers have not read this book. And they do not know they harbor Marxist ideas.
Yeah, right.
And most teachers are more like Marx than us. Do you know what I mean? They're academics, they're smart guys. That's like guys like Jordan Peterson fight back and Thomas Sowell fight back. But most academics are Marxists to communists.
Yeah.
And so my book, Capitalist Manifesto, starts with an attack on the NEA, National Extortion Association, according to Forbes magazine. So Sarah and I have been preparing the company for what the Israelis call the Iron Dome, because we're going after socialist media in Silicon Valley.
These entrenched groups.
Yeah, and the teachers union.
Yeah.
So that's why I was laughing at somebody says, if this building has a drone strike, it wasn't an accident. So I'm glad you moved in next door, George.
I'm glad it's on camera. Yeah, we got that out on YouTube. You're talking about taking away private property. And when you were mentioning that, I was thinking that our first form of private property is our own body.
Yeah.
So we're living in a day and age where the government that's in charge right now in the United States is trying to mandate that you do things with your private property, your body, that you might not want to do.
Correct.
So when you see that on the news, when you see those headlines, do you look at that through the terms of Marx and the studying that you've been doing for Capitalist Manifesto?
Yeah, mandate means you lost your freedom.
Yeah.
That's all it means. And I'm not against Republican or Democrat. I don't, Black Lives Matter. They're Marxists. I respect them. At least they state that.
Yeah.
We're a free country. You want to be a Marxist? Good. You want to be Christian? Good. You want to be Jewish? Good. You want to be Muslim? Good. It's freedom. But mandate means no freedom. And that's totalitarianism.
Yeah.
That's what's frightening to me.
Yeah. And they're trying to, in my opinion, they're trying to take away the ultimate private property.
Correct.
Because if you can control that, then you can pretty much make an excuse to take away your house, to take away your 401k.
How about take away your brain?
Yeah, to take away your mind. Yeah, I think that's one of the many things that should make people wake up.
Correct.
Maybe the average CNN viewer, we'll say, or someone who hasn't just been paying attention, and rightfully so. People have lives. They've got to take their kids to soccer practice. They have a 9-to-5 job. They don't have time to really, put the effort into understanding all of this, all the things that, that we understand. But when they really kind of start to open their eyes and see, okay, well, something doesn't seem right. I'm being forced to do all of these things, taking away the private property. I'm being forced to use particular words. The way I try to open up people's eyes to an even greater extent is ask them. I say, go back throughout history and look at the groups that have been in favor of censorship. Because right now we've got a lot of groups in the United States that are in favor of censorship, misinformation. We need to get rid of that on social media. And look throughout history, and how many times have they been the good guys? 0 times. 100% of the time, they have been the bad guys. So why should we expect that the people that are in favor of censorship today are somehow not the bad guys? And if you just kind of start looking at things just through that very simple lens, at least it would make the average Joe and Jane a little more skeptical to start asking some questions that I think need to be asked right now. Right.
And that's what he says in this book here. He says that a pure communist is a very highly educated person. But as Malcolm Gladwell says, it's not your education, it's the culture you come from. And most of the highly educated people today came from poor families. Because I don't know if you've ever heard it, people say, I'm the first in my family to go to college. For many people, that became the badge of honor. Oh, we're poor people, but we're going to send our kids to college. So kids today, how many trillions of dollars are in student loan debt?
Yeah.
We wiped out a whole generation.
Yeah.
That's Marxism. And we don't ever teach anything about capitalism.
Yeah.
And so when you look at all that going on, and our most educated, they're like Marx. They're poor people who got highly educated. They're called academic elite.
Yeah.
The liberal left. That's why we're in trouble, because that's what they're doing to our kids.
Yeah. So we're talking about how the U.S. is becoming more and more divided and just kind of more insane by the day. And whenever I try to take it to its logical conclusion, unfortunately, I always come to one answer, and I don't like that answer, but it's war. And you're someone who is a veteran. You've been there, done that.
Twice.
And so do you see that as nothing is inevitable? Thank goodness. There are no certainties. There are only probabilities. But do you see us on that path? Whether it's a civil war or maybe a war with China or something. I mean, do you think it can end any other way, or what do you think the probabilities are?
Okay, so let me step back just a few days, okay? Because when you and Snyder were talking, I had to get a dictionary out.
Yeah.
But what you were saying is playing out today. It's a Eurodollar system, yada, 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 yada. The European Union is crashing. So, but it's you and Snyder. But this morning, the Wall Street Journal comes up and runs this thing about what's happening in Ukraine, what's happening in Austria, what's happening in Turkey, and all this stuff. We're on the verge of war.
Yeah.
And what who's the Fourth Turning said?
Neil Howe wrote the book The Fourth Turning, where he is saying that we're at the end of a fourth turning right now. And I actually interviewed him, and I said, okay, Neil, we're at the end of a fourth turning. Every other fourth turning in American history has ended in war. Does that mean that, in the next probably 8 years here, that's kind of the timeline for the fourth turning ending, that we'll see a war in the United States? And he said, in a very sobering fashion, I can't predict that, but what I can tell you is that's the way it's ended every other time throughout American history.
And he said every time it was also marked by a weak leader. And in my opinion, if you guys are Democrats, that's your choice and all this, but I think Biden's the weakest leader we've ever had.
Yeah, and also...
It's a weak leader, then war.
Yeah, and also a loss of confidence in our institutions.
Look what happened in Afghanistan.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Holy mackerel!
Yeah,
that was the biggest. That was worse than what I went through in Vietnam.
Yeah, and I think it did. And again, it doesn't matter whether you're on the left or the right. I think that if
look at the facts,
look at the institutions today that we have, whether it's the CDC or any of them out there, and I think the average American, regardless of their politics, has far less confidence in our institutions today than they had in 2019. And it's only getting worse.
I cannot. Well, you have Biden and Kamala. And so I have a friend. When I went to Vietnam the second time, I was an aircraft carrier pilot, and my roommate became a lieutenant general. To become a general, you've got to be pretty sharp. I got kicked out as a lieutenant for disciplinary problems. But General Jack Bergman, I've been remaining the best of friends all these years, and he's now a U.S. congressman. And so I talked to him on the side. I said, what's happening? He says, what happened was that it was supposed to go, what's his name? Obama, Hillary. And this guy named Trump popped up. So it blew the liberal elites, the Clintons, out of the water.
Right.
So Trump pops up in the middle of this thing, so they had to take him down. So 2020, they took him down. So what I want to mention, he says, I have another friend, this is my General Jack Bergman, Congressman Bergman. He says his friend inside the DIA, Defense Intelligence Organization, he says, watch who Kamala picks as vice president. Okay, so the plan is already in. And this could be taken down also, but the prospects are Biden is not going to make it through his terms. He's mentally challenged. He's weak. So Kamala steps in, and the rumor in the DIA is whoever she picks as vice president is the puppet master.
Yeah, right.
That's the person that really runs the show. So I'm not saying it's true. You heard it here on Rich Dad and Rebel Capitalist. We have no substantial
or whatever we're calling this show today.
we have a drone flying overhead right now.
Yeah.
But that's what my friends in D.C. are telling me. They said, watch this. Watch who President Kamala, a black woman, which, who's never been to the border.
Yeah.
She's supposed to be the borders wide open. And he says, watch who she picks as vice president. Okay. So everybody, you heard it on the Rich Dad Radio and George Rebel Capitalist Radio here.
Yeah. So I want to go back to just your experience living through wars of the past in the United States and trying to help people protect their financial freedom. In the past, in the wars that you've lived through, how did people do that successfully?
Well, I call it gold and silver God's money.
Yeah.
Because they're part of the periodic table. And Bitcoin is people's money. It's a network system. They get stronger. Whereas the Fed and the Treasury are corrupted, as you know. Tell us about your event in Houston.
Yeah, that's Rebel Capitalist Live, and it's the second event that I've done. We did one
fantastic.
in June.
The speakers are fantastic.
Yeah, we actually had Snyder there. We had you at the last one.
Nobody understood Snyder, but I was there.
But this next one, you're going to be speaking again.
Kim's agreed to speak.
Kim's going to be...
Well, I'll drag her up. She said, I don't want to speak. I said, no, they'd rather hear from you, Kim.
Well, I think, Kim's absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
I'd love to get her
She's
up there.
Brains, yeah.
Yeah. But we're also going to have Dr. Ron Paul.
Oh, jeez.
And we're going to have Lynn Alden, who's another one of our favorites. She's going to be there. And we've got Richard Werner, which I'm very excited about. He's coming over from Europe, and he's someone that does very few live events or very few interviews. He actually invented QE.
Quantitative easing?
That's right.
Wow.
Yeah, he was consulting for the Bank of Japan back in the 90s, and he came up with the term. He invented it. Now, they didn't implement it the way he wanted, but I don't think there's anyone that understands the banking system and the global banking system better than Richard Werner.
And that's macro.
Yeah.
I mean, where you and Snyder go are macro. So we need to understand that better.
Yeah. Yeah. But there, and then Mark Moss and Lynette Zhang and Chris Cole's another person I'm super excited about. And Joseph Wang is going to be there. Joseph Wang actually implemented quantitative easing for the Federal Reserve.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he was in charge of the trading desk at the New York Fed in that transition between Janet Yellen and Jerome Powell. And he doesn't work there anymore, but that was his job. So when they had to do $120 billion a month, let's say, in quantitative easing, he was the one that was actually purchasing the treasuries and the mortgage-backed securities from the banks.
Okay.
So he's going to be there speaking, just giving us the inside scoop on how all of that works. And he sees the world in a very similar way that we see it. And he's going to give a presentation on not only how the plumbing works, but most likely, what people can do to protect themselves moving forward into a dangerous 2022. But people can check it out at rebelcapitalistlive.com.
What's one of the dates?
It's January 7th through the 9th in Houston.
Yeah, don't miss this one.
Yeah, it's going to be
changing. It's changing too fast.
Yeah.
It's changing too fast. I mean, exactly what you and Snyder were talking about, it shows up in the Wall Street Journal. Yeah. Everything you guys said was going to happen happens. And Snyder always said every time there's a reverse of the index changes, something bad happens.
Yeah, an inversion of the euro-dollar market yield curve.
And the euro-dollar market is 10 times bigger than the Fed's market.
Yeah.
It's the most powerful thing. So that's why you've got to be there. Because 2020, I predict, will be the hottest year in world history.
2022.
2022, right.
Yeah. And then when is your book coming out?
If we can find paper, it should be else. If I could give you
supply shortages, yeah.
Oh, God, it's terrible. I'll give you a hint, is that I think the price is about $20 today, but because of the price rises, it's now going to be $25.
Really?
But if you order now, I think Mona might kill me. But she says, I have to raise our prices on the book. So if you order now,
the cost of production is going up so fast.
And you'll get it before everybody else can if we can find paper.
Jeez.
And that's a good point. There was another book where we were going to do a reprint run. It's a 10-month wait for us to get paper for that reprint.
Wow.
10 months for a book.
We didn't even talk about it, but I've had a conversation with our good friend Jeff Snyder in Puerto Rico. We had dinner, and we were talking about, well, what if the Fed backs themselves into a corner where we've got high inflation, but they can't raise interest rates because of what that will do to the stock market? What do they do? And we were thinking, and Mark Moss has actually done a lot of research on this as well.
He's a smart boy.
Yeah, he is. And they think that we could go to a third option where the government comes in and implements price controls. Like we had
wage and price controls.
That's right, like we had in the 1970s. Yeah. And as you guys know, and what you're talking about, we're already dealing with massive supply shortages. And what the price controls do, they create supply shortages. So we could be, the government could be implementing these policies that will exacerbate the problem that was created by the government and the central planners to create the supply shortages themselves throughout 2020 and 2021. We could be just adding fuel to the fire going into 2022 and 2023 because they have no other option. And
well, the reason this is happening, as you said earlier at the start of this thing, because we're no longer a capitalist country.
Yeah.
A capitalist country lets the inefficient fail.
Free market.
Free market.
Yeah, right. You got to have free markets. Yeah.
They should fail.
That's right.
But the Fed and the Treasury bail out the incompetent.
Yeah.
And they kill, exactly as he talks about here, the S-quadrant, the small business owner.
Yeah.
They crush them.
That's right.
And that's what he predicted that in 1848. So that's why if you can make it to the Rebel Capitalist show in Houston, please come up there. Let's not go to that close. Sarah, what do you feel like saying on this whole thing?
It's an honor to have you in the studio again and running the show today.
He's only next door.
Yeah, but I don't get to see him that often. But it is nice to have him next door. This was probably one of my favorite episodes of the year because we covered so much. We took history to 1848, all the way through, Kyle Rittenhouse, which was just 2 weeks ago. So, I know our audience will appreciate the insight.
And then the last thing is, it's also in my book coming out, is they now let anybody vote.
Yeah.
That was New York. Passed that.
Just passed it. And now if you steal less than 1,000, it's not a crime.
Yeah.
The smash and grab goes out. They want to defund the police. I mean, this is all stage 2. It's communism.
Yeah, yeah. And de Blasio came out, as you saw the other day, and made the mandates applicable to all businesses, not just those with 100 employees. So if you've got one employee, you're that small, very, very small business owner, and your employee doesn't want to get the medicine for whatever reason, you're out of business.
Yeah.
You're out of business. And that's
totalitarianism.
Yeah, and that leads to Marxism and the control corporatism, where the means of production is through these mega corporations that are controlled by the central planners, the global elite, whatever you want to call them.
Yeah. So please come to George's event in Houston. 2022 is going to be a turning point again.
Yeah, yeah.
Not in a good way, but it's going to be a turning point. And the good news here is this: we make more money in crashes.
Yeah.
When things crash.
People who have financial education do.
Yeah, I love it. I'm going in on in 2007, when the last time the repo market inversed, led to 2008, the GFC. And that's when Ken and I backed up the truck. We borrowed $300 million right after 2008. And we bought all the properties. They were giving them away.
Yeah.
So it's not bad news. It's just for some people it's good, and for some people it's bad.
Yeah.
Anyway, this is George Gammon, the Rebel Capitalist. And
or Robert Kiyosaki of the Rich Dad Radio, the good news and bad news about money. We'll see you on the next video.